gold's back at a big level, Guy. It's basically approaching what felt like a bit of a blow off top in the summer of 2020, if you recall that move. And I think at the time that was the market basically suggesting that central banks globally were going to do whatever they could, right, to keep at least our economy and the global economy out of a depression, right? So they wanted to at the time weaken the dollar, which they were doing by lowering rates to zero. But then we saw that quickly turn around for a whole host of reasons, the dollar strength. And so, gold came off, but it's actually remained elevated over the last year and a half. And it's been a really volatile sort of asset. But you think that this is just kind of the party's getting started here. And you think the best way to kind of express this view is with futures. And for one of the main reasons is because the way in which you can kind of place stops in there and continue to pick at that level and playing for a breakout.
Now, I understand why a lot of people would look at this and say, "What are you, nuts?" I mean, we're about to make the mother of double tops and blah, and I get it. But, we had that move back in the summer of 2020, subsequent sell-off. Then we had the move back towards that high we failed at and the subsequent sell-off. And here we are again. Typically, when you see things, the third time's a charm. So I am playing for a breakout here in terms of the futures. And I think it's going to correspond with the triggers for a lot of these hedge funds who, by the way, are not long gold. If you look at the commitment of traders, as I said 100 times, the market might be bullish of gold, but the market is not long of gold yet. And we drew, look at what we did for you, Dan. This is in absentia. You weren't around. We drew this channel. And this is a pretty significant up channel. And again, people will look at this and say, why we're getting towards the top end of that channel. I totally get it. But this is a breakout trade. And I'm going to say, you know what? The amount of gold central banks have been buying, central banks continue to buy gold. The Chinese bought gold in January and February. We'll probably see March data that suggests the same. Here's my trade, 2020-ish. My initial target is 2050, but not necessarily to take profits, but I think to add to a long position. If it gets to 1950 in futures, I'm like, you know what? Once again, I've been proven incorrect. But here's a trade where I'm going to buy it here for a breakout. Initial target of 2050. I might add to that long position and buy the breakout, as they say, or buy the double for you people that have been doing this for a long time. So that's what I'm looking at. And if I'm wrong, you're out at 1950 and you live to fight again, Dan.
Well, there's a couple things I'd say about this trade, and I see what you're doing from a technical standpoint. You also have a fundamental thesis. You're also keeping a close eye on the dollar. You're also keeping a close eye on what's going on with Bitcoin, approaching, or it's above 30,000 for the first time in maybe a year or so. I mean, the whole idea also of playing for a trade like this has been, if you think about, again, we're going back to August of 2020, the last time gold, was it topped out. And then we had that period in early 2022, right? And the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And here we are, we're approaching those levels again. So the idea that you might add to the long position at 2050, I think is really interesting. It's also an opportunity where you would raise your stop. You'd probably raise your stop up there to about 2,000. Right. And so the other point I would just make about your 1950 stop is that you could almost maybe even have it a little bit tighter, Guy, like the idea, right, of playing for a little bit of back and fill, because you're not playing that one day. And you've said this for a while. We're going to wake up and it's going to be a whole heck of a lot higher because there's going to be something that's gone on where somebody gets, or a whole host of people get the memo at once. Listen, I love the way you're thinking about this trade. And I get it. You started out by saying some are going to look at that and say it's going to fail at the exact spot where it has in 2020 and then again in 22, but you think something's different this time. So I love the idea of playing for the breakout, using futures, having an initial target where you would add to the position to the upside, but also risk managing it with a stop to the downside. And listen, for some of you who don't want to risk, let's say 3% in something like this, you just use a tighter stop and you see how it trades when that stop's elected. And then you maybe wait a little bit and then you get back in there again with a tighter stop.